have really extreme paranoia, but I actually come to think of it as an advantage because in any situation, I often think about what is the worst thing that can happen?
Yeah.
And my brain pictures this like really dark, very unlikely stuff.
Same.
But actually, once I imagine it and I almost sort of plan for it, everything else feels really steady.
This is Anastasia Leng, founder and CEO of CreativeX. And what she learned the first time around changed everything about how she builds now.
The investor said to me, do you know what the difference is between a first-time and a second-time founder? He's like, a first-time founder, when I ask them, why are you doing this company? They'll often say, I love the subject matter. I'm so passionate about this thing. I want to see this thing exist in the world. And he said, do you know what a second-time founder says? This is the market, and this is the margin, and these are the unit economics I can get for my business. But when I started my first company, he was completely right. I was like, I want to see this thing. I didn't sit down and make a business model. And one of the tensions I found when we were raising our Series B, some investors want 10x year-over-year growth rate. And look, could you do that? Yes, but there's this line between trying to grow in that way and not burning the house down in the process. And it took me a while to figure out, like, they don't care. It's because they're playing mansions everywhere. But this is the only house I got.
Yeah.
I don't want to burn it down.
You left Google. Like, what caused you to leave Google? And what was the spark that got you to start your current business?
Leaving Google actually was...
Thanks for coming on another podcast.
Yes, I've been so excited about this one.
Really?
Yes, because you guys actually talk to founders about real stuff, which is actually very rare. So if it's a chance of not promoting the same basic LinkedIn sound bites, I'm all for it.
Well, thank you. That's what we're about. I'd love to open up with a question of just around, you've walked many paths in your lives. When the team and I were going through your background, I just thought it was incredibly cool. And so I'd love to hear sort of what early in your life impacted you the most as a founder today that you still feel is true to you?
I don't want to make it dark and grim because I was very lucky in that I had a loving family who cared very deeply about me and did their best to make a great life for me. But in some ways, it was also a life of, we left Russia when I was about 7 years old because essentially the USSR crumbled and people lost everything. And so we had to leave and we moved to Vietnam where I obviously did not speak Vietnamese or speak the language. And my parents eventually moved to the US when I was about 12, 13. And they were immigrants trying to make it work. They were very, very smart, very hardworking people, but they didn't speak the language. They didn't know the culture. And as a result, financially, we weren't very well off. And so I remember, many times in my childhood, sitting down and seeing something that I wanted, but knowing I couldn't have it. Even basic things like, I don't know if you remember this, but back in the 8th grade, Abercrombie and Fitch was all the rage.
Yes.
You remember that?
Yes.
And all the kind of cool, popular, rich kids would have the Abercrombie tops with the Abercrombie writing. And I really, really wanted one of those tops because, I want to fit in. I remember my mom one day saying, look, let's go to the mall. We'll get you an Abercrombie top. So we get into the Abercrombie shop. We look at it, and even back then it was $70. And she was like, Anna, look, I'm sorry. I just can't. We can't afford this. This is absolute terrible quality. I can't do it. And, my life is sort of my childhood was peppered with experiences like this, where there was something I wanted, but I couldn't have it. And I remember growing up telling myself that I was going to sort of solve this hunger problem. Now, of course, the great irony is that even as you knock some of these things off the list, you realize the hunger actually has nothing to do with financial comfort and everything to do with anything else. So I'm still working on that.
I've had a really similar dynamic in my life. And I wonder how much of that pushed my impetus to found.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
But then once you're founding for me, I need to make my investors money and all that good stuff. But it's I'm into the self-learning and and that's what's pushing me now.
Well, isn't it funny? Some investors talk about the fact that once founders get a certain money off the table, whether through an exit or sometimes the motivation disappears. I mean, luckily for me, that hasn't happened. Clearly for you, that hasn't happened.
No.
But it is a process of self-discovery because for a while you think financially, if you get this thing, all the other sort of voices will quiet down. And actually, at least in my experience, you recognize, okay, that was just the stop on the destination, but that's actually not at all what you're searching for.
Yeah, I've talked about this a lot on the podcast. I have pretty severe anxiety. And I think that's made me a good founder in some ways because I can run many scenarios in my head.
Yeah.
The shadow side of that is I'm never comfortable. So I'm well, if I'm never comfortable, I might as well build the most epic shit in the world.
Exactly.
And that's what I'm about.
I have really extreme paranoia, but I actually come to think of it as an advantage because in any situation, and people find this very strange, I often think about what is the worst thing that can happen? And my brain pictures this like really dark, very unlikely stuff.
Same.
But actually, once I imagine it and I almost sort of plan for it, everything else feels really steady and stable. And I'm actually surprised that, I think a lot of founders give up because they can't take the ups and downs. Versus I think because I imagine such dark, terrible things, it all feels kind of normal in comparison.
For me, like I have two things. Like the first is like my brain hack was why experience things twice. I was like, that's so inefficient. Because I was like imagining these like worst case things and I was like, why experience that twice? But the second thing is my wife, she's also a founder, just because of the way she was raised and like how she's built, like she doesn't need a lot of external validation. And I think that's made her an incredibly great founder. And I think the more times that we found it, the more you're like good external validation, bad external validation, that's like giving you feedback on the cosine wave, like doesn't matter. Like you need to build towards like your passion, your thesis. And like that's been like my biggest learning is, you know, like minimize external validation, which is incredibly difficult to do.
Absolutely. But you recognize, I remember, this is CreativeX, my second company. I had another company before. It was a total disaster. But that company had a lot of external validation, as in it had, top startup lists and top X women in tech, all the kind of BS-y things that seem really important when you're starting out for the first time, but you recognize are not only completely inconsequential to the growth curve of your business, but total vanity PR that after the first 5 seconds mean absolutely nothing. And I'm glad I went through that experience because now we don't do any of that stuff. And even when the team's like, hey, do you want to apply for this women in tech? I'm like, no, don't waste our time. This is not going to make any difference to the business. Let's focus on the stuff that actually matters.
I love your story around that. Like for me, I used to get a lot of dopamine hits from like closing a round of funding. And I see a lot of rounds right now where it's like people like, I just raised my Series A and then 2 months later I did my Series B. And, I won't say an individual's name, but I was with a very prolific investor this morning who's like a macro investor, goes on CNBC, all of the stuff. And he's just like, the math doesn't math. Like the math doesn't math in like some of these like fundamental AIs because like, think about it. It's like, if they're spending this much on compute and essentially like it's all betting on one of these being a monopoly and it's definitely not a monopoly. And if it's definitely not a monopoly, like, okay, like let's say it can save my business $10 million a year. Okay, like they get 9 million, I get 1. That's a good deal. But if there's 5 other companies coming in, like that's going to keep getting bidded down. So like the companies will get the value, not the foundational models. And he's like, yeah, it's a massive run, but it's like, it's the math doesn't math. And I think that that's just sat with me as a founder so much where what you're saying is the fundamentals of the business matter, right? And like, maybe your business, like maybe that PR piece got you the right employee, right? And maybe like, I'm not so I'm not on the other end of that. Like I'm trying to do more of that kind of stuff because I innately wasn't good at it. But I think what you're saying is really true, which is like you have to stay true to the core thesis and like what really moves the needle. And when the music stops on all this stuff, which it does a lot in startup land,
of course,
we'll all get penalized for being in the tech market or AI or whatever. But those who will survive will have strong business models and move the needle, just like Google did, just like Amazon did out of the .coms.
Can I just say, I'm still stuck on the point you made like 2 minutes back that after every investment round, you would get a dopamine hit and energy hit, which is very impressive for managing your energy because I would barely cross the finish line. I would crawl through it with absolutely no energy left over. So the fact that you're like, yeah, let's do this.
I used to sell cars. I used to do like, I'm very sales oriented, deal oriented. And that gives me like that, my superpower is like biz dev, deals, all this stuff. So like naturally, like I don't think any of us enjoy fundraising. Fundraising and capital structure to me is like very interesting, even though I'm not at like high energy finishing it.
You were a car salesman.
To get through college, a part of college, yeah.
I sold essentially door-to-door newspaper advertising.
I also did telemarketing.
No, right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, really important skills.
Yeah.
Right? I think about those skills all the time. The notion of going door-to-door and trying to convince strangers to do a thing. I think selling is such an important skill that no one teaches you.
Yes. And so much about it is not trying to cram a deal down someone's throat. No. It's actually deeply understanding the person, having incredible like EQ and then solving their problem or quickly figuring out like you can't solve their problem, you know, and moving off of it.
Yes. But also understanding I think a lot of communication is actually not in what people say.
Yes.
And most people focus, they barely listen, right? They kind of focus on the words coming out of your mouth, but it's the body language, the posture. I once read that there are 3 levels of listening, and most of us are at level 1 all the time. But actually, like the level 3 folks are so attuned to you that they'll read your intent based on the smallest gestures that you make. And those are the people who are exceptional at selling because they understand a much more comprehensive picture.
That's wild. I love that. I wonder how much AI is also like keeping people not present. Like I think social media definitely kept people not present, but then AI is like bringing everybody down to not be present and not hear one another.
Absolutely.
Like that's kind of why I did this podcast, is I wanted to like tell stories that weren't traditional ones out there and like understand the soul behind building companies.
Yeah. The thing with AI that I struggle with on the team is obviously like, and it's hard to talk about AI without sounding like a Luddite if you have counterpoints to make. But the thing I notice on my team is sometimes someone will hand me a piece of work and I'll be like, hey, did you use AI to do this? And they're like, yeah, I thought that was allowed. And I'm like, yeah, it's allowed, but this is still a shit piece of work. Can I say shit?
Yeah, you can say
awesome.
You say shit, fuck, damn, whatever you want.
Excellent. I'm like, this is still a shit piece of work. And the judgment that I think we have had to hone through like the school of hard knocks.
Yes.
They are not getting the experience of doing it, which means it's just a trail of shit work with no ability to discern whether or not it's actually any good.
For me, I use AI in everything with all my work products, and it's accelerated me as a CEO. Like I'm spending an hour a day now coding, which is like, I never used to do that. Like, and I never would have thought I'd been able to do that again as a CEO, and that's a gift. But the thing that's interesting is I had someone in my team produce like a huge 20-something memo, and I'm like an asshole on memos because I think memos are great. They're a way to distill things. They're a way to communicate very well. Like I'm sort of like of the Bezos school of thought around that.
Same. Because you can hide all manner of shit in a PowerPoint, but you can't do that in a memo.
And it was totally AI slop. And I was like, I don't care that you use AI. And you actually should be. Like, I'd penalize you if you're not researching, not having it auto, not having it red team yourself. I love having it do pre-mortems on things and then come back. But I understand how the model works, and I understand how it can check itself and how I can get it to check against its biases. And I use it to superpower and create a really good artifact. Whereas like this individual just like gave me 20 pages of slop that I was just like, this is drivel. Yes. You said something that I think is like a lot of folks need to hear. And I think it's a very like repeat founder thing to say, which was like, you were an incredibly hot startup. You got placed in a ton of press, all in the top press publications, and you still had trouble raising. And you still like, it did nothing for your business. So like, can you tell me a bit about how that felt and the learnings you had from that? Because you're building your current business like really differently now because of that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you recognize that every audience is motivated by something different, right?
Yeah.
And in that case, in the press at the time, and this was about 12, 15 years ago, look, I think I was a woman in my 20s. They wanted certain stories. I'm not saying the company had an interesting thesis that was relevant at the time. And so it made sense, but let's be honest, right? They're probably, when they were making these founder lists, they probably had a certain quota of women. And when there was a big popular thing of, hey, let's highlight all the female founders because there aren't that many of us and all of that. So to some extent, I probably benefited from that, but again, did nothing for my business. When I spoke to investors, they didn't give a shit about any of that. What they cared about were, again, how big is the market, right? What are your unit economics, all of that stuff. Now, I think it took me a while to understand that investors and founders speak very, very different languages, to learn to speak the language that they could actually understand. I used to think the onus was on them to do this, but actually, no, it's completely my responsibility to make sure that I speak their language. One, the investor said to me once, he said, you know what the difference is between a first-time and a second-time founder is? And I said, no, what? And he's like, a first-time founder will come in, and when I ask them, why are you doing this company? They'll often say, I love the subject matter. I'm so passionate about this thing. I want to see this thing exist in the world. And he said, do you know what a second-time founder says? He says, this is the market, and this is the margin, and these are the unit economics I can get for my business. And so there's sort of a way of thinking about business. And, when I started my first company, he was completely right. I was like, I want to see this thing exist. Yeah. I want to do it. I didn't sit down and make a business model. I mean, did you for your first business?
I mean, that's so interesting because I'm actually like the flip opposite. So like I'm a finance background. So for me, I was just like, I really want to be a founder. I had many runs of like not being a founder. And I was like, for me, it was so much more about like, I want to see if I can do it and like be in the seat. And I found a business in insurance. And I've talked about this before, but like essentially the math worked. And there's definitely like billion-dollar companies that were in my space doing that. But I found out after doing it for years, like my passion wasn't being around insurance and being with insurance people. And one day I was like on a walk with my wife and she could tell I was like miserable for like a couple months. And she's just like, do you want to be an insurance CEO? And I was like, fuck no. And at that moment, I know I was like, whoa, I didn't do the right thing at the right time. So I actually think repeat founders are more about the passion and like I say like love is leverage. And so for me, like, yes, like you need to have good unit economics. Yes, you need to know TAM, all that stuff. You need to be able to talk to investors. But end of the day, no matter what you or I do, Sequoia or Thrive or in one of the big funds is going to like see it's working and be like, I want to bet and I didn't get it on that company. So I'm going to go fund this person out of Stanford or this person here. And they're going to try to find the best people in the world, give them way more capital than you and set them against you. Every time this happens, your only leverage is that like you actually are a population of one that can probably deliver on this company because like you're just freakishly into that company.
You're obsessed.
Yeah. And that's like my current company is like I'm probably in the top 1% of context switching ability. And I can spin up a lot of different professional services companies. Like I don't degrade. And that was something I didn't realize until I founded Infinity. And I'm now I'm like, have fun competing against me. And like my co-founder Francis, like, oh, get out of it. Like it's hard to compete against us in the space, no matter. So it makes capital not as defensible. And that's actually what I think. Repeat founders don't go into a business very like laissez-faire. Whereas like the first time I did my first company, I went into it very like, not as thoughtful as I thought I should have been. And then I thought the accomplishment was raising my seed, raising my pre-seed, all of that, but it was like not at all. And I'm curious, like for you, like you went through a lot of pain with your first business. Like you left Google. Like I want to ask why, what caused you to leave Google? And then I think like you went through all this pain with your first business. Like what was the spark that got you to start your current business?
When I left Google, and I was similar to you, the first company, I thought the achievement was starting a company, but you recognize very, very quickly that the actual achievement is building a business. And these are two very, very different things, right? On very different timeframes and a very different level of commitment. And again, someone said this to me when I was first starting my first company, and I didn't quite appreciate it at the time, but they said, are you ready to work on this for the next 10 years? And of course, I was in San Francisco at the time where people were selling the startups for like $1 billion, 18 months after they started. And I was like, okay, like I'm going to be done with this thing in 3 years. And lo and behold, that is obviously not how it happens for most of us. It is to build a proper business takes time. Look, leaving Google actually was not that hard once I got over what it meant for my identity. And because Google does a very good job, as many companies do, of, the Google, Amazon, Meta, Variety, again, I'm sure there are many others. They are very good at hiring underconfident overachievers, which was me, right? Work was such a big part of my identity. I constantly wanted to be at the top of my quote class to get promoted and all of that stuff. So I poured every ounce of my being into my job because that is where I would get sort of my rewards and all of that. All the chat is about how few people get in. You feel like you've been let into this magic place. And once the door's shut, it's like a mirage. It will disappear and you will never get let back in again. Now, what made the situation even more complicated is that one of the things that my parents felt happiest about is that my life was stable, right? That I was in a place where I made good money, the company was stable, I was secure, and I was not someone they had to worry about, right? It's like, in some ways, it was the immigrant dream, right? Like maybe you had it tough, but your kid was fine. And so I remember telling my mom that, and my mom's a business owner. You started a restaurant, and my dad was an entrepreneur, again, had a number of ventures, some that he got to near IPO. So this was sort of in the gene pool in some ways. But when I told him I was leaving, you can sense the fear. Yeah. It wasn't disappointment, but it was real fear of like all the stuff that I've done to get you here, you're sort of throwing away. But I felt inextricably because, I'd lived through periods of not being as financially secure as those around me and all of that. I didn't fear the poverty. I didn't fear the failure. Yeah. I did fear losing the status. And I still remember the first time, I remember back in the day when, people would talk to each other on planes. I'd sit on a plane and people would be like, oh, inevitably, first or second question was, where do you work? Or what do you do? And I would tell people I worked at Google, and my God, and in 2007, people's eyes would light up and they would quiz you for ages because Google was a magical place. And I still remember the first flight I took when I'd left Google and I'd started my first company, Hatch. And I was like, oh, I run a startup called Hatch. And they were like, cool. So, and that was the hard bit. But once you get over that and you realize that actually doesn't matter.
It's so interesting. So tech used to be so Rebel Alliance and so like pirate flag and outsiders, like, and then it's really become a status symbol. And I think like Google's that. I think OpenAI and like Anthropic are definitely that right now. And it's interesting in some way, like kudos to them because they've all been able to attract incredible tech or incredible humans and build really great products. The flip end though is like you go back and I sort of wonder where all these minds have been pulled from, you know, like different thinking in government, different thinking in trade. Like, you know, I just felt like there used to be so many more people that are very exceptional in a lot of different career paths. Like back, maybe I'm romanticizing it, but
I don't think you are.
It's just interesting. Tech is like a status thing now.
Well, it's partially a status thing, but perhaps maybe the more generous interpretation, it's a money thing.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we all want to feel a certain level of financial independence. We want to provide things for, and look, nice stuff is nice, right? And the reality is there are now fewer occupations where you can reliably make a decent living. And tech was one of them.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually didn't want a job at Google. So I got my job at Google coming out of undergrad. And the summer before, I'd worked at a brand consultancy firm called Interbrand.
Okay.
Loved it. Absolutely loved it. They had 7 interns. I was the only intern who got offered to come back, and I loved it. And I got an offer. It was $35,000. This is 2007.
Yeah.
Right? $35,000 to come back. It's a job in New York City. And at the same time, someone was like, oh, you should interview for Google. And I said, you know, I've got my thing, but I felt like the responsible thing to do was to go out and get options. So I interviewed for Google. I got an offer. And when the recruiter called me and, you know, I'm on the phone. She's like, so let me go through the offer details with you. And she said, your salary is $70,000. And I genuinely thought I'd misheard. And I was like, 17? And she was like, no, 70. And I went back to Interbrand, to my director at the time, and I said, look, I really want to stay here. I really want to take the Interbrand job, but I have this offer from Google. It's twice the money. Is there anything Interbrand can do to move closer to this? And the director said, I don't even make this much money. You should take this job. And so again, you know, and who knows what path I would have been on, but it was partially a financial equation.
Yeah. I mean, and like, kudos to Google because they've built some heavily defensible tech and like, you know, AdWords, YouTube, like all the stuff that like allows them to go out and pay premium for talent.
Yes.
And I think we're now seeing like the true durability of that because people were writing Google off, I don't know, like last year. And then like Gemini is like a killer product.
Absolutely.
And like the data moat and YouTube, like YouTube is like displacing a lot of Hollywood, like long form podcasts are going up. And so it's really interesting to hear that story. So you went through pain, leaving Google to go do your first startup, and that was like some splash of water in your face. Like you went through pain, obviously, like I'm guessing that startup didn't IPO.
That startup is not IPO. That startup died a slow death.
Which is like like a slow death is far quicker or far worse than a quick death. Like you went through all that pain, like why start another company? Like that's the thing I'm so interested in with repeat founders is like we've gone through the worst pain or like the most pain ever because we usually like our first baby dies.
Yeah.
And like my first startup was like my first baby. And then I realized I was like, wow, this is like I'm the wrong person to run this. And I sold it, you know? And like I'm very curious, like what was the driving force and like why found again?
You know, I mean, if I'm being, look, I can talk about many things. Like I love the people I was working with on the first company and many of them are still part of this company. And I love the team and I love the intellectual challenge of all of that. But look, I think the reality was I wanted to prove that I could do it. When I left Google, I recognized it wasn't just to start the company. Again, I think every milestone you cross, you're like, cool, yeah, that doesn't matter anymore. Like, I want to achieve the next thing. And so to know that, I'd started something, I'd hired some people, I'd raised a little bit of money, that didn't feel like enough.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to prove that I could do it. I think that the other thing that made this a little bit more complicated is because we had such a hard time raising money, and it took us ages to raise our Series Seed, at some point I had to do the thing that I dreaded most doing, which is I went to people I knew and said, hey, look, I'm trying to get this thing off the ground. Would you consider essentially being an angel investor? And all my over the 5.5 years I've been at Google, all my managers at Google wrote me a check.
Wow.
Which is great, right? It's lovely. Yeah. It's lovely because clearly they saw something that I think even back then I didn't fully see and understand. Yeah. But these were the most professionally influential people that I knew, and I had their money. And look, I understand now that they wouldn't have each written me a 10, 20K check if they couldn't afford to lose it. Yeah. But nonetheless, to me, that felt like a tremendous amount of responsibility.
If someone gives me $1, I take a huge amount of responsibility in that, especially given
yes,
how hard I know it takes to make $1.
Absolutely.
It's very like intimate thing when someone invests in you.
100%. And so when that first company wasn't working, I really felt like it is my responsibility to turn the ship around. And actually, even though we started another company, we took everyone who'd invested in the company and took their principal and gave them equity in the second company. And a lot of investors didn't like that.
I love non-traditional stuff like this. Like, that is so cool.
Yeah, maybe. I think what surprised me is the number of investors who said, we want a clean cap table. The thing didn't work out. Everyone's a grown-up. Forget all your angel investors and everyone who invested before. But my view was, these are people I know that I want to stay in my professional orbit. How could I possibly wipe them out? But this was actually quite divisive. A number of investors said, we're not going to give you a term sheet unless you start a completely new cap table.
It's so wild. Because I guess they're just assuming that you wouldn't own enough, or that they'll get recapped later, or they'll get diluted later.
Yes.
But I also think a lot of tech is so consensus based. And sometimes that's really good because we have consensus around a very outlier thing like large language models. But the downside of that is it gets so consensus based where it must have clean cap table. And clearly you're going to get insane network effects by being really loyal to some of your earliest angels. Have you gotten any cool network effects by doing that? Has the karma paid it forward yet? Or is it still more just your state of flow as a founder?
I don't know. I've never thought about it that way. I always felt, because I've never revisited that decision. It just felt like this is the right thing to do. And I want to look these people in the eye, and I want to work with them again in whatever capacity. And actually, some of them invested again when we raised future rounds. I was very impressed when we had an opportunity to raise our Series B. We were so oversubscribed, we got to do a secondary. And
Congrats.
Thank you. It was a dream moment to go back to some of these early investors and say, hey, by the way, this 10K or 20K check that you wrote a few years ago is now worth, 10 to 20x that. Would you like to take your money out? Because for ages, I never thought, again, if you look at our history, I never thought I would be able to give them their money back because we went through so much hardship with the first company. And all of them had said, no, keep it in there. I'm there until the music stops.
So to me, just being objective, I think that it played out for you. So whoever was the funds that told you to do that was probably bad investors. Not calling them out, but I am kind of a little bit where it's I think we need to build with good intuition as founders. From my perspective, you should not be so zero sum. And I feel like it's become so zero sum for the investor and the founder at the expense of employees, angel investors, the ecosystem. And this zero sum nature is killing our ecosystem, and you're building in a really sustainable way. All those people will probably back anything you do in the future. All those people are probably referring amazing talent to your company. They're probably willing to go to bat, and that's far better press than you're a top 10 company list, right?
One of the tensions I found, and this became especially prominent when we were raising our Series B, is some investors want, 10x year-over-year growth rate. And look, could you do that? Yes, but it's very different. There's this line between trying to grow in that way and not burning the house down in the process.
Yeah.
So one of the questions I asked during our Series B round, and again, this came from learning lessons the hard way during our seed round, was in a year, what does good look like? What kind of growth rate are you thrilled with? What kind of growth rate are you sort of trying to fire me, CEO, et cetera? And for many folks, for many of the traditional VCs, a lot of the answers you'd hear is look, if you're not growing, this was again 4 or 5 years ago, if you're not growing 3-4x a year, and spending all the money we give you in a very compressed short amount of time, we're not happy. But that's because, and it took me a while to figure out, they don't care if I burn my house down in the process.
No.
Because they're
playing
mansions everywhere. But this is the only house I got.
Yeah.
I don't want to burn it down.
Yeah. I've talked about this on the show too. So what was being underwritten in 2023, 2024 is really different than what's being underwritten now. And that's a huge risk in the venture ecosystem, because if you raised a C round or an A or anything and then done incredibly well, you usually had the next milestones of capital that could then float you there. And now everybody seems to be just trying to put money into very big, flashy, large companies. How do you think about managing into that? Because that seems like a really astute question given what's happened in like the macro and startups?
I think there's no greater leverage in being profitable. And being profitable is not something that a lot of investors will push you to do. Traditional venture. Now, growth capital is a little bit different. And so something that we've tried to do is every time we've headed into a fundraising round, even our Series A, our Series B, we were within eyesight of profitability or break even. Not because I think it's the Shopify CEO who said this, like, my job is to make $1 of profit, right? And I think it's sort of an operating principle. That sounds about right.
That gives you tons of leverage.
Tons of leverage, tons of optionality, tons of control, right? And so I think for us, the goal at the moment, and this has always been the case, is how do we run the company in such a way that we don't have to raise. We'll raise if we want to raise because we see a clear opportunity from the infusion of capital to do something we couldn't do without money. But I never want to put the company in a position where we need to raise.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's so interesting too with like venture cycles, because you're hearing so much other, like people like doing like 4 months and then raising my Series B and then 3 months and this. And like, that's clearly a different strategy. And I think you're bringing up a very astute point to the listeners, which is like, a lot of the funds, they have 30, 40, 50 bets they can make, and a couple will break out of that. Like, this is like the one house that you have.
It is the one house that I have. And I remember, this was a terrible time during our Series seed round for this company. It took us a long time to get to product market fit, right? We were going after enterprise companies. We were targeting $1 million+ contracts. And that doesn't manifest itself overnight. It takes time and trust. Yeah. And for that segment, you have to lay a lot of groundwork. But a lot of early stage investors, you invest by spreadsheet, right? You want a curve that goes up and to the right. And if that curve's not there, you're like, well, why am I spending my time with this company when there are a million other folks? And so we had actually quite a few investors who, between our Series C and Series A, in one form or another, sat me down and said, you should shut this thing down.
Wow.
One of them said, actually, I remember this very explicitly. He said, I don't think this company is worth you. And actually, if you shut this down, you could run one of my other portfolio companies because I think you're a great CEO, but this company is beneath you. And luckily, I had a very contrarian board member at the time who I think prided himself on thinking a little bit differently.
Yeah.
I was 3-4 years into my founding journey. When investors who are professional, who have publicly recognized names, tell you to shut your company down, even as a dedicated, very committed founder, you can't help but entertain that notion. But we're not for this person on board, and I'll call him out because I'm sure he would mind. There's a guy named Alex Dunstan, who was a very small investor at the time as part of the Saatchi & Saatchi fund. He said, ignore all of this and keep building. And it honestly took one person on the board saying, keep going. The stuff that you're trying to do takes time. And I often think back to that moment because, again, were I to quit this journey then, we would not have built everything we built now.
Yeah. See, that's what I mean, though, about I think if you're flashy and taking a big fund and like you don't love what you're doing and love the disruption you're trying to cause, like how can they compete with you? Like that's the moment when probably like, I don't know, like 9 out of 10 of your other competitors would have just like hung the towel and like taken the job at the other company that was perceived to be better.
Yes. Well, I'm curious because you said, you're talking about that walk you were taking with your wife.
Yeah.
At some point, you must have loved insurance tech, but did it get to a place where it stopped, where that passion died off? Or were you always not as motivated by that area?
If I could go back with honest eyes, I think I was more enamored with the idea, like I really love founding and creating, and that's true. And like I create a lot of like my business now, I create a lot of different business lines in AI, and like I get a lot of fun from that. And so like I'm in flow in that space. So that was like one driver. The other is like I geek out on like data and like risk data. So I actually really like reinsurance. And building an insurance company, you have to be really good at reinsurance and reinsurance data. But then when it comes to like blocking and tackling and doing like day-to-day insurance management and all of that stuff, it's like a 1 + 2 + 3 or like 1 + 2 = 3 thing. Like it's so linear that at that point it like wasn't interesting to me. And I like generally was just like, I'm not into running an insurance company. I'm into creating an insurance company. I've invested in insurance companies since. I believe in the market. I love the people that do it, but like it just like I wasn't the right CEO for that. Like and it took me doing it to figure that out. And it was like 2 months of me not being able to get off the couch because I was like so burnt out. And then like, like my wife who's like founded multiple companies as well, she was like, this is weird. Like,
so what did you do after she plants that seed in your head and you finally say out loud, I don't want to be doing this anymore? What happened next?
My first thing is then I went and met with my co-founder, who now she's a CEO of one of my other companies and she's killing it. But I was like, do you want to be a CEO of the insurance company? Because like we had a product, we had revenue, it was like doing well. Like frankly, there's other competitors have come out that are crushing it and I'm happy for them. And she was like, hell no. And I was like, uh-oh, like we both got into this for like not the right thing. So then the next question is like, what do you do? So like I started calling my main investors, and I could have raised more money, but I started calling my main investors on my board and was like, look, like I don't care to carry this on anymore. It's too small, I think, to hire a CEO into it. I don't know if that makes sense unless you guys want to do it, but I am like really good at corp dev. I'm like happy to sell this. We had an offer on the company before and I ended up selling it to a really large like supply chain company, but that took me 9 months to do. But that calling the investors was like the hardest call I ever had to do.
How did they react?
They were all like super cool.
Really?
Yeah. Because like I luckily selected investors that were former founders and then they were big investors and they were really involved in this. Even after that, they were like literally to like the last day when like the business transferred, they were all like really involved. Wow. And so I appreciate they sharpened a lot of steel with me as a first time founder and I have a lot of love for that. But that was like the hardest. They're specifically like my lead investor. It was like literally like the hardest call I had to make.
Did those investors, did you ever work with them again?
Yeah. Like I refer them deals. Several of them have invested in like multiple companies. Like they were all like very fintech investors. So like the current company I didn't have the opportunity to like work with them.
Yeah.
Because like I'm more of a generalized applied AI play, but I send them deals. I'd refer to them. I would like LP in any of their funds. Like I think they're all prolific people.
So the reason I find this so fascinating is because I think there's this distinction between what might be construed as quote giving up.
Yeah.
Versus knowing when actually walking away is an act of strength.
Yes.
And I think as a society, we don't decouple those things very well. So what I find fascinating about the story is like to some people, the many degrees removed narrative of like, oh, you gave up.
Yeah.
But actually, no, you were like, my greatest leverage is not going to be exercised here. I'm going to do the responsible thing and tell my investors that I don't have the energy to push this up the hill because I'm not excited by it. And yet now you work with many of them again.
Yeah. Well, and like the business and the asset I've created, my current company has like literally like over 10x the revenue. It's like literally like night and day. And I think like, I've hit different trends and whatever, but I'm like very in flow. And so I think a huge part of founding is knowing thyself.
Yeah.
And it's a vehicle for your own person. Like one of those investors told me, like the failure rates on these things is so high, you're probably not going to get rich out of doing any of these companies. The reward is like, this is a machine, a vehicle for your own personal growth. And I'm like addicted to learning and hacking and like up-leveling myself as a founder. And like, that's the thing I'm like competitive about.
Yeah. The thing that I often, when we were first starting the company, I remember when we were under 10 people sitting in one office, sort of under $1 million in revenue, all I wanted was to be at the stage we're at now. Offices in multiple countries, over 100 people, like tens of millions in revenue. And now that I'm here, I think a lot about those early days and how fun they were.
The good old days.
The good old days.
Yeah.
The 0 to 1 days. And I do think there is something about that I completely underappreciated the first real time I was building. Yeah. But what you're saying really resonates because I do think for me, what I love most of all is getting something that didn't exist into reality. Or I also equally love convincing people of something they don't initially believe. I love the intellectual challenge of that. But once something becomes kind of common parlance or common sense, I get less intellectually energized by that challenge.
You've had huge success. You're in a bunch of different countries. Like that revenue trajectory is incredible. How do you keep the passion? Like, do you still feel small and still feel like there's like bigger dragons to slay? Or like, how have you sort of like brain hacked yourself for the next stage?
It's been a struggle, right? But the way that I have tried to do it is because the first time it happens, the first time you're like, oh, I'm not enjoying some of the stuff anymore. It's a really paralyzing feeling because you're like, oh God, like, what does this mean? Am I not a good founder? Am I not a good CEO? Am I burnt out? I've never experienced burnt out. So, I don't know. So you have all these questions about what does this really mean? I've come to and actually what I did back then is I went to our chairman. I have a lot of respect for our chairman. And when I brought him in, actually, one of our Series B investor introduced us. I was interviewing chairs at the time. When he introduced this guy, he said, you should know he's fired the last 3 CEOs of companies that he's chaired. And I was like, cool, I guess I got to take the call anyway. So I took the call and this guy was great. And I was like, look, if he can't make me a better CEO, I've got no hope in hell.
Yeah.
But the commitment I made to myself is that I would always be very honest with him. So when I came in and I finally said to him, look, like, all these things are going well. And he's like, I feel like there's a but coming. I said, but I'm not enjoying my job. His response was, oh, well, let's kind of take a look at what you're doing. And his conclusion was, you're so mired in the operational running of the business, you're not actually doing the thing that gives you energy and passion. And through this, I realized that, what I love doing is I love talking to customers. I love doing product. I love, again, the intellectual challenge of convincing people something they don't believe or getting them to see the world a little bit differently.
Yeah.
But instead, I was trying to think about, how do I make our sales funnel 10% more effective? Those are really important, really critical jobs. They're just not the jobs that I want to do. So I went on this multi-year journey of essentially trying to find people who would, quote, as cliche as it sounds, run the business so I could do other stuff that was on a much longer time horizon.
What's the biggest thing you learned about finding talent to run your company? / flipping, there's a lot of people out there looking for roles at like an amazing company like yours. Like, what's the stuff you look for in people to get you some hires?
The people that I work best with are people who I think are independent of thought and spirit. I have a very hard time. And the thing that I am most paranoid about is as a company grows, there is a tendency for the company to become slightly more sycophantic. Like I noticed, again, I've never been famous. I have zero desire to be famous. I think being a founder CEO or any CEO probably gives you like a 1% sip of what it's like to drink from the cup of fame where, I don't know if you've noticed this, but more people laugh at your jokes. Now, look, I've got lots of good qualities. I'm not particularly funny. I'm okay with that, right? But more people laugh
I think you're funny.
Thank you. More people laugh at your jokes. When people seem excited by the stuff that you do. There is a distortion field when you are the founder CEO. Now, again, when you're 10 people, no one cares because titles don't mean anything. Yeah. But there is some magical, some point, some threshold at which new people come in and they're like, oh, you're the CEO. I cannot tell you, I think this idea is crap because you're the CEO. And so all of this is a long way of saying the people that I've tried to surround myself with are actually probably the people that I fight with the most, who'll be like, I think this is a terrible idea, or I think you are not considering this. Because my sense of when the company becomes an echo chamber, that's when everything rots.
Love that.
And so yes, there is perhaps more debate sometimes than I think some people enjoy, but I actually really thrive off that.
We call that in our culture Socratic culture. So like my co-founder and I are really different. Like I honestly thought when we were founding our current company, I was like, we're going to like blow up in a month because like we're so different. And I was like his first customer for his last business. And then I was like, why do we like get along even though we have different points of view? And it's like, we're actually willing to totally come across the table to the other side of the table and consider the other's point of view and like change and like objectively change our minds. So like we've built this into the culture. It's like, I don't want robots, but I don't want combative people, but I want like thoughtful opinions that effective challenge. Like I want ideas beat up.
Yes.
And I think that that's so hard to find with people, especially in the age of AI, because like AI is just like, I agree with you.
Yeah.
I think you're great. Totally. And you're like,
great idea. What a unique thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that I struggle with, and I've been trying to think about ways that I can articulate that, but I've always really disliked the word employees. I don't know why.
Same.
I've always hated that word. I think there's something about that word that, again, it feels like a transactional, contractual relationship that inevitably implies a sense of sort of hierarchy and all of that. And I don't want employees, right? I want thought partners and I want builders. Yeah. And, again, I don't know about you, but I hate managing. I absolutely hate managing people. But, I love leading teams. And those are two different things. It took me a while to recognize
You're kind of like built for the age of AI though, because it's like there will be less managers and there will be just more like there will be leaders, there will be ICs, like that's the new flex. Is people are like, oh, I'm an IC. And it's like, oh crap, like that's awesome.
I know. I'm so amazed. I hear of founders who are like, oh, no one reports to me. Everyone reports to the chief operating officer and I just hang out and do my own thing. But when people apply for a 10-person company, I think they kind of understand that, cool, I'm going to wear a bunch of hats. It's my job to figure things out. When people apply for a 100-person company that's post-Series B and all of that, I think they tend to take more of the employee mindset. And so I've had to give a talk at all hands a number of times where I'm like, you are all still builders. Like there's no room for passengers here. Yes, we might be ISO certified. Yes, we might have tens of millions of dollars in revenue, but you are all still drivers. Like there are no passengers here.
I think it's to defend people that come into these companies. It's like you think like, oh wow, they're special. They figured something out. And like, you're like, what do I know? But the invite I give is I'm like, everything we're probably doing is completely wrong and shitty and the market's moving so fast. Like someone better is going to wipe us out. Like tell us what we're fucking up. And I like solicit that as like, what's wrong about this? Another kind of thing I'm quite interested in is you run like kind of an under the radar CEO founders group. And part of our things is like secret conversations, what comes up in that group that isn't necessarily said publicly? Like, what are some like big things that are being discussed with CEOs right now that you can share?
So I've been meeting with a group of, there's six of us for the last 4 or 5 years. We meet once a month. It's off the record. We go away on holiday once a year as a group. And, someone once said to me, being a founder or founder CEO is like being the liver. All the toxins get filtered through you.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that there is a huge amount of truth to that. And so one of the things surprising is like, look, we talk a lot of business issues and, whether it's a lot of it is people stuff, frankly.
Yeah.
Whenever someone's fundraising, it becomes a big part of it. But what surprised me, if you zoom out from all of that, it is actually a lot about emotional and energy management. I use energy in a not sort of woo spiritual way, but mindset management maybe is a better word for it.
I call it like flow state, where it's like I'm really trying to be in this like flow state.
Yes.
And it's funny, like doing multiple of these companies, it's like now I figured out, it's like, okay, I have to like eat this certain way, I wake up this time, like get this amount of sleep. Like I'm very focused on like tweaking myself into this flow state.
There are the physical components, right? But obviously those components have a direct relationship as to how you feel mentally in your mindset. But I find the thing with the startup, and again, this comes back to why I would absolutely hate to be famous, is people tend to assume, especially as the company grows, that you're some sort of superhuman. I mean, the level of expectation people place on you, the things they expect, and, the kind of requirements are absurd. And so, frankly, a lot of what we talk about is sort of normalizing the pressures that come with it and just sort of recognizing that we are all still just like regular people trying to do a thing.
Yeah.
It sounds like we're complaining a lot, which is probably true, like poor CEOs. But I do think there's almost a dehumanizing aspect between how, as the company grows, your team treats you and the fact that like you're still a person who has like very real feelings and very real things and real insecurities. And we're trying to manage that. What do you talk to your CEO friends about?
I mean, for me, I wanted to build off that story. The first is like my mom came from very, very rural Louisiana. And the first thing she always told me when I was like really little is she's like, no one is like better than you. You're no better than anyone else. And like everybody's equal. Like go like you can engage and speak to anybody. That stuck with me through my whole career. So it's like, I don't care if I'm meeting with like a billionaire or I'm meeting with like anybody in the world. Like I'm just like, hey, what's going on? Like I literally just engage, listen, and present. I think the biggest advice I can give those people out there that want to engage with high-level CEOs or notable people is like, just treat them like people. And like that will get you like so much further in the room.
Absolutely.
Like both in your career and in everything. Like those types of folks always stand out to me, and I use that hack myself.
Yes.
But yeah, my CEO friends, like we all hate fundraising. It's the same thing. I think I love that. I've struggled with like what do you call employees? Like that's so funny. I also have been trying to find a name for HR that's not HR because I hate human resources. I hate people, like the head of people. I'm like, couldn't there be something that's like not like about the whole thing?
Yeah, Vayner, which is I don't know, Gary Vayner. Chuck, he runs a couple of big agencies. His people team, or the head of his people team, is called the Chief Heart Officer, which is, I don't know how you feel about that. The other one,
cool.
The other one I've heard is culture, but I don't love that either. I don't think culture is something one person can head.
Yeah, but I also am like the CEO. I'm like I do the culture.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I think a huge thing, like me and the founder circles are talking now, which is like it's a huge issue that a lot of companies were being underwritten the last couple of years and not being underwritten now. And like most people I know at mega scale and smaller scale, we're like, okay, cool, we'll just go profitable. And now AI is giving us the leverage to do that. Like, and I think venture's like shooting itself in the knee. Like they're Silicon Valley banking themselves. Like
absolutely,
So
I mean, they're in trouble.
Yeah,
right. Because I think they've made a lot of questionable investments, and they're probably not going to return those.
Yeah. And
the question is, how are you going to sweep that under the rug before your LPs notice?
Yeah,
and that's a problem.
So on a happy note, because we're at the end. I usually ask.
This has flown by.
I know. I usually ask like one question, which is like, if you were to put something on a billboard, like what would that be?
How many people would see it?
Everybody.
Everybody. Times Square billboard.
Be specific.
Okay. I would have a picture of Lionel Messi, the footballer.
Yeah.
And I would have a quote of his, which is, "It took me 17 years and 114 days to become an overnight success."
That is a perfect thing to end on. Thank you for coming on the pod.
It was great to be here.